Have you ever had a movie that you just absolutely adored but nobody ever seemed to talk about it? Well, for me, that movie would have to be Scooby-Doo 2 Monsters Unleashed. I swear to God I cannot stress it enough. Watch this film. Oh yeah, and also 2012's Paranorman, I guess. I remember seeing this film in cinemas as a kid and thought it wasn't like anything I'd ever seen before. It was dark, serious, and comedic, in a market where 10-year-old me thought kids' films could only be the latter.
Ooh, jazzy.
Animated by Laika Studios, this was their second feature-length film, with the first being the beloved Coraline. And since it's currently the month of Halloween, I figured why not talk about their film that doesn't take place at Halloween, but you know, it's got horror elements and it's about zombies and you know what I mean.
Zombie! Somebody say Crombie? It's not even a word. You're losing your mind.
Now, if you haven't heard of Laika before, I honestly wouldn't blame you. If we were to rank the most well-known animation studios, it would probably go something like Disney, Pixar, DreamWorks, Illumination, and then all the way down here would be Laika. And that's a shame, honestly, because they've consistently been pushing the boundaries for animated children's films, releasing hit after hit after Box Trolls after hit after Missing Link. They're one of the last companies I know of making near fully stop-motion films, with the only other one I know being Aardman. And while it's usually their film's greatest strength, it's also the company's greatest weakness. More on that later. They really hit it big right off the bat with their first film Coraline. It was a huge success and is still extremely well remembered to this day. It was able to be both funny and unsettling at the same time, while being topped off with some spectacular stop motion that only enhanced the creepiness. But 3 years later we got their next film. So let's look at Paranorman and see if it could live up to the high expectations that Coraline set for them. And I mean, for me at least, there's nowhere to go but up, considering the last Halloween-y type film I talked about was Monster Family. Well, unless you want to count Fred the movie.
Please! Make it stop! Just get that awful, awful boy away from us!
Paranorman is about a young boy named... well, take a guess. That's right, Paranorman is about a young boy named Norman, who is a social outcast due to his ability to see the dead, which obviously nobody believes him about, with even his family openly calling him a freak to his face. The only living friend he's got is Neil, your generic fat comic relief character. Norman is told by his crazy uncle, who can also see ghosts, that before he dies he must pass on the responsibility of keeping the town's witch at rest to Norman. When Norman fails at this ritual, it unleashes a group of zombies upon the town, so now Norman, along with the new friends he made along the way, must find a way to put the witch back to sleep, along with the zombies. This sounds extremely generic, and that's kinda because it is. But I think this movie does a really good job at taking such a classic horror trope, and is able to flip it on its head through the twists in the third act. As it turns out, the witch, who is now terrorising the town, was just a little girl who was sentenced to death by this courtroom, as they believed she was performing witchcraft. This then reveals that throughout the whole movie the zombies that were chasing Norman were actually looking for his help, as they knew he could speak to the dead, because they were the people in the courtroom who ended up killing the girl. Now realising this, Norman goes to speak with the girl at her grave to attempt to reason with her, telling her that she is being no better than the people who convicted her all those years ago. This leads to her finally being put back to rest, as Norman is now understood and respected by his family and peers. Again, I love how they took what could have been another generic zombie movie and turned it into a heartfelt story where you're able to understand and sympathise with all parties. It would have been so easy for them to suddenly paint the town council as the villains now, because of what they did to her, but they perfectly explain themselves in 3 simple words.
We were scared.
Of what?
Of her.
If there was one problem I had with the story, it would be that the movie starts and ends really strong. But if I'm being honest, the middle is kinda weak. It's mostly just scenes of the zombies walking around town, and while I do enjoy the twist of the zombies being more afraid of the humans in the modern world, it feels like the story just kinda halts at this point, and then quickly jumps into the third act. It's not a huge deal, and again, I think the start and the end of the film more than make up for it, but it is something worth noting. I also don't mind as much because these characters are fun to watch in any scenario they were put in. Norman is a really sympathetic character and makes for a great straight man to his family and friends. He's constantly got this expression and tone of voice that makes him look and sound like he's completely fed up of everything. And for being the simple archetype of fat sidekick, Neil can be very funny.
Keep out of my way.
Or what?
Or, I'll punch you in the boobs.
I don't have boobs. These are pectorals.
I also love his dumb brother who seems completely oblivious to the stuff happening around him. He also delivers the best twist of the movie, but I'm not gonna reveal it here. If you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about, it's great. And for starring kid actors, they do a surprisingly good job at bringing these characters to life. There is one character though that I cannot stand, Norman's dad. He's just way too mean. And I get it, that was the intention to show how Norman's claims of talking to the dead is affecting his family life, with it causing multiple arguments between his parents. But he's just so unlikable and never gets called out for being a shit person.
Sometimes people say things that seem mean, but they do it because they're afraid.
He's my dad. He shouldn't be afraid of me.
He might just be the worst part of the movie. He's just as bad as the dad from Chicken Little. Well, okay, I wouldn't go that far, but he's up there. It literally takes Norman saving the town from an evil demonic witch for him to say,
"Well done, son. You did it."
Really? That's it? No, I'm sorry, son, for not trusting you and joining the mob that wanted to burn you alive? Alrighty then. While it has this dark story, the movie still manages to be really funny, and it never feels like it's disrupting the seriousness of what's going on, with the jokes usually being completely separated from the plot, and mostly consisting of quick gags and throwaway lines from the characters. I was surprised at just how adult these jokes were though. We've got gags about running people over, steroids, and...
Neil! Do you get the door? Are you freeze-framing Mom's aerobics DVD again?
No!
I appreciate how they're able to have these more adult moments without it coming off as them trying to be cool and edgy. This could have easily come off like, "Whoa guys, look at us, we're talking about ass and we can say boobs. This ain't your mama's kids film." I guess that can kinda be said about the whole movie. It's a very dark plot for a children's film, and there's a ton of quiet, somber moments which I can appreciate, with the best part of the film by far being the climax. I love how peaceful and almost dreamlike it is, which contrasts greatly with the intense visuals and sound of the scene before. And this whole part of the movie is greatly enhanced by the gorgeous animation. It's astounding what they were able to pull off here. From what I've heard in behind the scenes interviews and stuff like that, the people at Laika have a genuine love for stop motion, and are desperately trying to keep it alive in a market oversaturated with CGI.
The thing about stop motion is it's so hard to make those movies because everything needs to be built. So if you got a kitchen table, you got to build everything from the silverware to the salt and pepper shakers to the puppets to the tablecloth. Everything's got to be built. And what that means is that you, as a filmmaker coming into stop motion, you're immediately asked to start making concessions because it's so hard. And so the idea was that let's stop making those concessions, and then let's start looking at technology to be able to tell the stories that we want to tell. And then beyond that, take stop motion in those worlds to like places that it's never been before. And
their love of the medium is clearly evident throughout this entire film. From the character movement to the sets, the spectacular lighting, and this seamless blend of it with CG to execute stuff that wouldn't be possible with just stop motion. Like I mentioned earlier, the climax has the best visuals of the whole movie. The lighting here is phenomenal. I love the electric sparks that shoot out of her, and that you can see her old self trying to tear out of it. And the soundtrack to accompany it is amazing too. This is one of the only movies I've seen that has made me want to go out of my way to listen to the music on its own. The cinematography is also great. It has so many nice shots, like the one that first reveals how Norman sees the world, and all the shots looking up at the witch's cloud makes it look so cool and menacing. Seeing all the work that went into this movie with its visuals just makes me appreciate it even more. I mean, can you imagine what it would be like having to make one of these films? It looks like hell. But again, the other aspects of this movie are also great, so it ain't just style over substance.
This is just part of the mourning process.
Oh, stop indulging him. I'm nothing if I'm not liberal.
Revisiting it after all these years, I still think Paranorman is an amazing film with likeable characters, for the most part, a shockingly dark story and sense of humour for a kids film, and breathtaking animation from a medium that doesn't get enough love. I'd recommend watching it if you haven't already, especially if you're a fan of Coraline but for some reason still haven't seen this one. Despite being generally well received, it ended up performing just fine at the box office. It didn't flop, but it wasn't the huge success Laika were hoping for after Coraline, a trend which sadly seemed to continue for them, with each of their films seemingly performing worse and worse. Their most recent film, Missing Link, didn't even break half of its $100 million budget. The sad truth is stop motion just ain't as marketable to kids as CG films are. I know Laika do commercial work too, so I'm guessing that's how they're able to stay afloat while their films continue to flop. But I fear that if this trend continues, then they're gonna have to stop making films altogether. Let's just hope it never comes to that, though. Else the puppets might go mad and enslave us. Yeah, like that's ever gonna happen. Again.